Chapter 3 The Forest. James slowly opened his eyes, head throbbing, and saw colorful light. His parents were over him with soup, medicine, and tea. "Mom," he whispered. "Dad, what happened? I remember coming home for breakfast and then waking up here." "Do you think he has amnesia?" his mom whispered to his dad. "I doubt it," replied his dad. "If he can remember what happened before he blacked out, then he's fine. Speaking of which, do you remember what you did this morning?" "Well," said James, "I woke up, went into the house, went to the frozen river, but the river—" He caught himself. He knew what he had seen, but if he told them, they would have thought he was crazy. "But the river got boring, so I came back home." Good," said his mom. "Thank God you're okay. When you fell back and collapsed on the floor, we were about to call the hospital. Thankfully, you didn't get injured at all." James rose out of bed. He needed to get back to the river, but his parents would be too cautious. He needed to prove that he was okay. "So, can I have some breakfast?" James asked, "or at least resume for where we last left off from?" "Okay," his mom said quietly. James and his parents hopped off bed and walked to the kitchen. James saw that for breakfast, his parents had made him some pancakes. James's favorite. He started eating as fast as a cheetah and continued until it was all gone in 30 seconds flat. He decided the easier way to go to the river was to act healthier and better. Then he could get to the river in a couple of hours. The process took a lot longer than a couple of days. His parents kept up their guard for the rest of the day, not giving him a single chance to have alone time. There were no time for breaks or mistakes. The second day James's family was there, James tried to sneak out. His parents caught him, though, and put up cameras all over the house. The third day was one of James's worst days. His parents started to feed him, and all they would do is watch TV. The fourth day, James had it. He decided to call a family meeting. "Mom, Dad," he sternly said, "you guys have been babying me for the last 4 days. I really want to do something besides watch TV." "That's a sentence I never thought he'd say," his mom giggled. The giggling turned to laughter, but James gave them both the look. "I mean, the day I fainted, I can get the reason why you guys would baby me at that point, but the second day was so bad, so my only resort was to sneak out." He thought about what he said. "Oh, I hear it now. But my point is, there are some other things I may want to do." "Fine," said his dad. "Tell us what you want to do, and we'll let you do it." "Okay. I want to go to the river," James excitedly told his dad. No way," his dad exclaimed. "You fainted right after you left." "So if I was in the car for 20 hours and then got out and fainted, would I not get in the car?" James argued. It took a little while for his parents to answer this question. After all, it was a perfect comparison to what happened. Besides, James had a point. And when they did answer the question, all they could really say is, "That's not the same thing," or in reality, "It's exactly the same thing." James gave his parents a stare. They looked back, and after a while finally gave in. "Okay, James, you can go to the river," his dad said, "but there's really no point in going there. It's frozen." "That's what you think," James mumbled while smiling. Again, James got dressed in the intense amount of clothes his mom called, and he quotes, 100% protection. He didn't want to mention the fact that he fainted in the same clothes as last time, so technically that did not make it 100% protection. He went outside to see the same snowy trees and mountains he saw before. He walked forward towards the river. Frozen. Maybe he was just hallucinating. He looked at the frozen river one last time before he closed his eyes and thought about what he had seen just a couple of days ago. Was he really crazy? He remembered when he fell and how he saw everything defrosting. He slowly opened his eyes. Like before, the land around him thawed until there was green grass everywhere, and the river was water, and he was once again wearing his bathing suit. He wasn't crazy. He slapped himself, only finding out that it wasn't a daydream like he had thought. It was real. All real. He jumped in the river, happier than ever, and splashed around. This started to become consistent. Over the course of a week, he became accustomed to the strange anomalies and came to the river every day, happier and happier every time he did. He thought of this place as somewhere to get away from responsibility, from time itself. He loved the river so much. Every day he would splash more and more and go farther and farther along the stream. But one day, he went too deep. It was a winter day like any other in Colorado. The wind was howling, the sun reflected off the white, fluffy snow, and the birds were chirping as they migrated to the south. James got out of his nice and comfy bed. He could smell his mom making waffles. Once he got up, he went to the bathroom and then started watching TV. He watched some ATLA, Avatar The Last Airbender, link down below, a show he loved, and then ate his waffles. He got dressed in his 4 layers of winter clothes, yelled that he was going to the river, and then slammed the door and ran. At this point, he was used to his surroundings changing. He did his routine. He closed his eyes, thought of swimming, and voila! River. James jumped into the river and started to swim. Down the river underwater. He rose back up and saw where he was. Not his farthest. He swam for about 5 more minutes and noticed that he couldn't see the garage. This was far enough. He felt the strong current pulling him forward. It was a nice, chilling current that gave him goosebumps. He stayed there for a second, deciding whether he should stay or go back. In the end, he didn't get to pick any of his choices. He walked to the side of the river, wanting to take a break, when he slipped on a rock. He fell backwards and felt the current pulling his almost motionless body forward. After a minute, he tried to pull himself back up, but the current kept pulling him in. He started to panic. The current was getting stronger and stronger, and the river was getting deeper and deeper. Soon he couldn't touch the bottom. He tried to swim underwater, but he couldn't. He went above water again, only to see a massive drop ahead. Not quite a waterfall, but it was tall enough that he could injure himself. He saw rocks coming up ahead and he grabbed one. As soon as he did, he regretted it. The rock held him for a little, but then it started to loosen. James let go of the rock, but it was too late. The rock was loose. James struggled to get behind the rock, but his attempts failed. The drop was so close he could feel his water dripping on his face. No, that wasn't the drop. That was rain. James looked up at the sky and saw thunder clouds. He noticed one that looked like a rock. He looked behind him, and the rock crashed into James. Everything was green. The trees, the grass, the forest. James looked around. He saw pine cones and trees and nature everywhere he looked. He had a splitting headache. He listened for anything. A river, people, animals, nature, anything. It didn't go well. He looked up and then turned around due to what happened with the rock. Nothing was there. He felt his hair. Wet. Then he felt something. He pulled it out of his hair only to find that it was a long, brown, mossy stick. James threw it into the forest and then yelled as loud as he could, "Help!" His voice echoed throughout the woods. That couldn't be good. He decided his best chance at survival was exploring the terrain. Then he wondered, why no snow? There was beautiful green everywhere, but no sign of anything remotely white. Weird. He walked around the forest and then looked down and stopped. Snakes! James saw a snake a few feet ahead of him. He looked around and saw he was surrounded by snakes, from the left to the right. He heard mumbling noises. That's weird. Snakes can't talk. He heard even more commotion after that. things that started to sound like words. He started to make out what they were saying. The boy has no idea we can talk. Then again, the sight of humans is the weirdest thing of all. They have no idea what life is, the essence of magic. They think balance is the creation and destruction of things. What fools they are. James got chills. Then at once he saw all the snakes turn their heads towards him. The yellow eyes, the slimy green scales. He started to panic. Then he heard the whispers again. The whispers got louder and louder until all he could hear were voices talking. The talking turned to screaming, and James couldn't take it anymore. He closed his eyes, plugged his ears, and yelled, "Stop!" And then it stopped. The whispering and yelling, it all stopped. He looked around. No snakes. He wondered what happened. He started to cry. He started to cry because of the snakes, the river, his parents. It was all gone. Everything he thought was good or bad, gone. His family, gone. Everything he had ever known, gone. He started to run and cry through the trees and the branches and the grass. He ran for hours and hours, blocking out all the pain he had caused himself. He stopped running and sat down and thought about what happened. "Okay," James said. "I'm stranded in the middle of nowhere. I have no food, water, or shelter. And for animals that can talk and understand the meaning of life, interesting." James took a moment to think about what he had just said. It was a lot to process, but it was all true. James stood up and walked. Not forward, not backward. He just walked. He took in his environment. "Trees, trees, more trees," James complained. Nature, sky, pillars of stone, and that's it. Wait, pillars of stone? Pillars of stone! He started running towards the gigantic pillars. He started to see weird markings on the pillars. It read, "The Death of Magic."